We are excited to be here this morning and to engage in a bit of a chat about what's happening in logistics and transportation, and particularly focusing in on this concept of innovation. As a logistics and supply chain educator for roughly around 20 years, I have had the wonderful experience of standing in front of MBA class after MBA class after MBA class. And one of the things that we talk about when we talk about the role of logistics as it relates to corporate performance and strategic and competitive advantage, the concept that emerges is, there's such thing as a competitive advantage, but more often than not, those competitive advantages are temporary. That in an environment where there's so much focus on technology and where the competitive landscape is just so aggressive, you can potentially count on a competitive advantage that is going to be temporary at best. So how then do you maintain what we might call a sustainable competitive advantage? Or as the tagline for our session today suggests, how do you stay ahead of the pack? And the resounding response that I get from MBA class after MBA class is that the only way to be sustainable in your competitive advantage is to be innovative, to gain a competitive advantage and then immediately start working on the next iteration of that competitive advantage. And so today, we want to talk about this notion of innovation as it relates to transportation. And in doing so, have some dialogue with a company that I feel has basically jumped out and said, hey, we're going to be known as innovators, not just as service providers, but we also want to be innovative in the process. And that's J.B. Hunt Transport. So this morning, what we're going to do is just engage in a bit of back and forth dialogue. I've got some questions, but we, of course, would love to entertain questions that come from the floor, again, around this idea of innovation, and particularly talking about some of the more recent developments as it relates to how J.B. Hunt is innovating as a service provider. So if you would, please join me in welcoming to the stage my co-presenter today, Eric McGee, EVP from J.B. Hunt. Hey, man.
How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Glad to be here. Thank you, guys.
So, Eric, let's just jump right in because we've got limited time. So we're talking about this notion of innovation being very important in today's logistics and transportation environment. What's your thoughts around innovation and why there's seemingly such an urgency around innovation and adopting and embracing being innovative?
Well, I think it's just the speed of change. Everything's getting faster, everything's more connected. And if you think about it 20 years ago, you could have had a slower pace to get to change. And if you missed something, you could catch up a lot faster. Right now, the iterative process of change and progression is happening so fast that if you're not on top of it and you're not in the middle of it, you could be left behind, and it could be very expensive for you to catch up and leap forward. So I think it's just really important when you talk about information, data, everything that you have at your fingertips now. Literally, you think about what you have on your phone today.
Sure.
You have so much information and so much access to the pieces that you need to help you leap forward and change fast. So I think it's just really important that you stay on top of it now more than ever. And that will accelerate.
Sure.
There's going to be faster ways to get information and faster ways to innovate, and you have to stay on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly, we had a question that came up from the floor around J.B. Hunt kind of navigating legacy systems to become innovative. And that actually aligns with maybe the question that I had next, which is, how does a company like a J.B. Hunt, a big corporation that has been in the game for a very long time, and we see a lot of dialogue around innovation and startups.
That's right.
But when we're talking about a major corporation, a big organization, being innovative has to be a cultural issue. And from what I've learned, it has to be almost a part of the way that we think as a company. So how did you go from legacy systems to being more innovative? And in a bigger scale of things, how do you maintain that emphasis on innovation? And how is that a part of how J.B. Hunt operates?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it has to be cultural, I think. That's where it has to start. It has to be part of what you do. And if you think about just transportation in general, J.B. Hunt's been around nearly 60 years, and I would tell you probably 50 of those years, we were a leader inside transportation, but I wouldn't have called us an innovator. 30 years ago, we got into intermodal, and we started accelerating that about 15 years ago. And I say that was probably the time that we embraced a different culture, and that culture being that you have to be okay to disrupt yourself. And that's something I would tell. I was on a panel yesterday and we talked about various things, and the thing that I said there was you have to be okay with change, and you have to be okay with doing something different. And what ends up happening too often in too many businesses is that people become accustomed to what their core business is, and then they can't change. They can't see that they need to disrupt themselves and do something different. And so what ends up happening, as we've seen in transportation, a lot of the names that you hear talked about now today aren't your legacy transportation companies. They're not your legacy brokers. They're not your legacy carriers that are being talked about. And I will say I'm proud, with J.B. Hunt that you do think about J.B. Hunt as a legacy company, but someone that has broken out and really started doing something different. For us, it's been in the technology arena. We have spent capital for many, many years on equipment, trucks and trailers. We feel that we're experts in being able to run a network of trucks and trailers and containers. But the last several years, spending multiple hundreds of millions. When we announced it, we're spending $500 million on technology. That was something completely different for us.
Yeah.
But those are the things you have to do. And so just one last piece when talking about disruption, you have to think whenever we started doing mode conversions off the highway, and we started doing that really heavy in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. We were the largest trucker in North America at that time. And we literally needed to go to the customer and take them a new solution that was more efficient, innovative, that was a better answer for them, but it would take literally a load off of our own truck, potentially set a truck against the fence to be able to push forward with something that was better. And that was the largest step forward that we took, and the validation of that, I think, really cemented the culture that we have inside J.B. Hunt, which is we want to innovate. We want to disrupt and not be disrupted by someone else.
Nice. Eric, we had another question that came up around responsibility in innovation. And this question is about being fiscally responsible. But I'd like to maybe ask a broader question around just responsibility. You mentioned a moment ago about your customer and providing your customer with an alternative solution. That sounds to me like being very customer-centric. And so I guess when I think about this notion of being innovative, but also being responsible, can you talk a little bit about the voice of the customer and how responsibility to the customer has perhaps played a part in this innovation dialogue, but also fiscally responsible, making sure, you talked about this investment. That's huge, right? And so how do we ensure that we're not jumping out there for the sake of innovation and getting ourselves into some financial crosshairs?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's always a degree of risk anytime you do something different. You're going to try things and some of the things aren't going to work, but I think they have to be along the process. The bigger vision and the bigger understanding of what you're trying to accomplish, you're convicted to. The little steps along the way, you try some of those don't work out quite as well as you want, you make adjustments and you move on to the next. So you stay with your bigger vision. You might veer the course just a little bit, but the bigger vision stays there. I think when you talk about fiscal responsibility, it's both to the shipper and the carrier. We feel like that we're pricing in an environment that is fair. You could have a strategy that is to go out and gobble up all the market share and let that drive the platform. And I'd say that's not really the position that we've held. We want to be fair to the market for shippers, give them a competitive solution, and we want to be fair to the carrier community as well. And so that's been a focus for us to make sure that we have that proper spread. Then you add all the values on each side of that. So for the shipper, you're trying to give them information and make them have the opportunity to have a more efficient network and a more efficient experience. And the same thing with the carrier, allowing them, how do you enable their business? How do you enable them to be a better company? And inside both of those equations, you're helping them solve for the most efficient answer. So the shipper is going to find the right cost at a better at the best level of service. And that's the one thing that I think technology has brought forward. Finding the right truck at the right time gives the shipper a better service solution. And then on the carrier side, they've never had information. So providing that information to them about the quality of the shipper, helping them get paid fast, what's the market doing, perks and opportunities for discounts on fuel or tires or any of the things out there, help them run a better business.
Right. And you're referring to your 360 service now, right? In that,
Yes,
particularly in that
360
space.
or anyone that has a platform that's digital that's really trying to connect and create efficiencies for those parties.
Yeah. So I definitely want to get into that whole matching conversation because that has been a theme as it relates to some of the innovation. But before we go there, we had another question that actually sparked another responsibility domain for me. So when we talk about being responsible to the customer, being fiscally responsible, but what about responsibility to the driver, right? So that's the voice of the driver. Someone asked this question around, innovation down to the front line. What are you guys doing to ensure that, the driver is a part of this dialogue, or when it comes to being innovative, that it's not just a high-level corporate thing? I can sit down and talk to you as an EVP, but how would I ensure that if I talk to a JB Hunt driver, that they also embrace this notion of being innovative?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and everyone that's in this room that has worked inside transportation, the ups and downs of the tightnesses of the market, and you've seen the conversations that you've had around tighter markets when a shipper wants to be a shipper of choice. And then sometimes when it gets loose, or most times when it gets loose, that conversation kind of subsides. When you think about the driver needs a great experience, whether it's tight or whether it's loose. And for them, in many instances, when the market is loose is a time you really need to embrace them more. It's more difficult for them to find freight. They're setting longer. It's also the times that it's potentially that they get overlooked at the dock and they're not taken care of. They're not getting in and out quickly as they should. So I think what digital platform innovation has allowed is the transparency to that shipper experience. And so when we have shippers that come to us, we have a scorecard on the shipper that is scored by the drivers that are out there going in and out of their facilities. And it's one of the big conversation points that shippers have with us is they want to see what their scores are. They want to read the comments. They want to read them unfiltered. As bad as they can be, they want to read them. And that piece there, I think, will allow that to never change to where it's not just a conversation that you have for shipper of choice when the market's tight. When you have that, you think about kind of the Yelp rating that's out there, when you have that transparency and visibility all the time, it's going to stay in the forefront. If that's the case, then everything you think about from restroom facilities or getting drivers in or out or break rooms, how they're treated, all of that will then translate into a much better experience for that driver. The other thing that I'd say is just the access to information is allowing the driver to better utilize their time. A driver today only uses 7.3 of their 11 hours in a day. So there's nearly 4 hours a day that's wasted. Some of that is wasted at the dock. Some of it's wasted looking for loads. There's a myriad of reasons why that's wasted. So if you can help them find a load faster, find a load closer, help them get in and out of a shipper quicker, you're creating time that they could be on the road making money, which is a better way for them to be able to have a quality of life with a better paycheck.
Gotcha. Yeah, really interesting. And as you're having these as you're making these comments, it's kind of alluding to you guys as service, your 360 marketplace, and this notion of providing freight matching, right? This whole matching marketplace in which we operate. From what I've been told, you can actually potentially find true love by swiping left or right. I've been out of that game a long time, but this notion of finding a match, right?
That's right.
That's been a big conversation point in the marketplace. And so the question I have for you is not so much about the mechanics of that, but more around migrating to that type of business model, when in many ways you guys are responsible for aligning competitors with opportunities. So how do you go from a company that's focused on your customers and servicing your customers to providing solutions that actually involve aligning your competitors with potential opportunities? And that's a really interesting transition. And when you talk about disruption, that had to be a really big disruption in thought. So a little bit about that migration to that new business model being a platform.
Another great question. It's something that we've experienced a number of times at JB Hunt. I talked about intermodal when we started working on that 30 years ago, and then in particular in the 2000s with our truck line, and we were actually moving business from the truck line to intermodal. There were a lot of heated conversations inside the building around what we were doing and making sure, you always want to make sure you're doing the right thing for the parties you do business with. That's customers, that's carriers, drivers. And at that time, you were literally putting trucks against the fence, which would potentially set a driver. And so you have to wrestle with that. Is that the right thing to do? At the end of the day, if you don't do the best thing for the customer, someone else will, and you won't have the business. And so you have to do that. And so we go through that, and then as we were growing our dedicated business and our intermodal business, and we were taking some of those trucks out of our truck line and moving those into those business units, our customers came to us and said, we need a bigger truck presence. The biggest segment of the market, we need you to be more present there. So you can look at it and say, well, do you go and invest a bunch of capital and go buy a bunch more trucks to become the largest trucker in North America again? Or do you go partner with the people that are out there that do a great job? And that's what we chose to do when we started ICS about 12 years ago. And starting ICS and getting into brokerage was something that was really, really different for J.B. Hunt. So then once again, we had business inside our corporation and a brokerage that was wrestling to say, well, what's best for J.B. Hunt or what's best for the customer? And then at the end of the day, you come down and you say, okay, what is best for the customer? Because you want to retain the business and be able to have that repeat scenario so that you can have that to build off of for your customers and carriers. So there's been a number of times that we've had to go through that dialogue inside our organization, and we're doing it again now inside brokerage. There's a transition period when you go from your traditional brokerage that's been around for 100 years, where you pick up the phone and you smile and dial and you call and you connect two parties on the phone, to now being able to do that more digitally. And so you have the responsibility of making sure you take the people that you have in the business that their jobs may change, make sure you're giving them the correct and proper training, retooling them and putting them in the right place so that the platform allows them, enables them to provide growth for the organization. And that's the thing that we have conversations right now, because people say, okay, this is phenomenal. We can do a lot more of this digitally, but what happens with the people that's there doing the job today? Well, we have a huge growth opportunity and a huge growth appetite. We're a very small piece of the entire transportation segment. It's $800 billion, and so even at $10 billion, we're not even scratching the surface of what the opportunity is.
Right.
And so we tell people that we just need to retool and refocus what we're working on and be able to go out there and grow faster. And so.
Right. Eric, when I think about a lot of this, we're talking about these platforms and this kind of marketplace environment that we're operating in. And when I hear, I've been involved in several conversations about this over the last couple of years. And, one thing that I hear is, well, what does this do to pricing? And what about contracts? And so this dialogue of, this is the way we're doing things. We want this to fit within the way we're doing things. But, again, when we start talking about disruption, maybe this is a new way of doing things. I'm not quite sure. I mean, I hear the pros and cons of both sides here, and I'm thinking shipper versus, the services that you guys are providing. What are your thoughts on how these freight matching platforms are really revolutionizing the way we have to think about fundamental transportation issues like pricing and contracting and capacity forecasting and such?
You bet. Well, if I took those separately, if I just talked about pricing alone, I think it does allow you to be more efficient. And so I think it allows you inside brokerage to maybe take some of that traditional margin that's been there and share that back with the shipper and share that back with the carrier. So I do think over time there is some efficiency there that systems will allow you to bring. But I'll tell you, the other thing is when you think about contract term inside transportation, typically it's thought of, especially on the large shippers, that you need a 12-month contract.
Right.
And so inside a 12-month contract, it stabilizes the shipping expense to a certain degree. But then when you have those disruptions inside the market, you see that route guide fail, and then you go out to the spot market.
Yeah.
And in too many times, if you think about the conversation with a customer, the spot market has a bad connotation. And it's because typically the larger shippers that are on a routing guide only goes to the spot market when it's 4 p.m. on a Friday. But they don't go to the spot market when it's 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, when they're living inside their routing guide. And if you think about how contracts could change whenever you're literally going out and finding the best truck for that opportunity in that exact moment and getting the best price in that exact moment, you're finding the true market. That is the market. And so I think what you could see over time is that 12-month contract go away, and you could be working more on a true cost transactional basis. Because here's what I'll tell you about what we found with the platform that was surprising for us, and this has been happening for us for about 18 months, so it's very, there's a lot of data there that suggests that it's accurate. The second best service we have inside our entire organization goes through our digital platform behind Dedicated. Our dedicated operations, where everything is very controlled and static, runs 98, 99% on-time service. The business that we transact inside the marketplace, which has a run rate of 1.1 billion right now, runs over 95% on-time service. And so when I go back to contract length and you try to say, okay, I'm going to put Dr. Esper Trucking on this one every day of the year, and you're going to be the best truck every day of the year, well, it doesn't always work out that you're the best truck. And so then that causes strain for you, or it causes strain for the shipper if you're not there or you decide to do something different. What we found is when a carrier comes into the marketplace and they select their own load, our service is over 95%, and their cost is 9% below the market. So you're allowing the market to truly find itself. You're allowing the market to find the right truck at the right cost, and then you give that value back to the shipper. The carrier is getting the value. They're finding the load that they want. They're servicing it well, and they're giving you a fair price. You flip that back into the shipper, and then they get what the true market is, and they get the service benefit of that.
Yeah, so Eric, a little devil's advocacy here, if I might. So, we've had a lot of dialogue in supply chain and logistics around two big themes, right? Collaboration and this emphasis on relationship building and really being able to align yourselves with trusted partners that you rely on, right? And so I want to ask your thoughts around this conversation considering collaboration, right? Because this seems to kind of maybe migrate against this notion of being collaborative and having those trusted partners. Secondly, risk. Of course, as we know, we're in a very heightened risk environment. Years ago, when I was in the industry, we would make decisions and ask for forgiveness instead of asking for permission, right? But nowadays, you have to really think strategically around risk and continuity planning. So again, when we think about risk and this notion of being able to, predict and have some degree of assurance that things are going to operate the ways that we predict they are. And then when we think about collaboration and this notion on this focus on relationships, what you're saying kind of goes against kind of both of those in some ways, right? This notion of, I can just let the market do what it's going to do, that seems a little risky to me. And also it seems to kind of work against this idea of having trusted partners. What's your thoughts around those counter arguments around something like a marketplace or leveraging a platform?
I think there's definitely a place for the routing guide and for a shipper to have those partners with certain carriers or certain brokers. Yeah. But I think if you think about the sheer flexibility and power in numbers, it's the part that, I've been with J.B. Hunt for 21 years. I spent my first 13 years only on the asset side of the business, and then I was asked to come over to lead our brokerage business about 13 years ago, or no, about 8 years ago. Feels like 13 years, and you guys can appreciate that.
There you go.
But what I had to learn was what's the value of being a broker, and what I learned really quick was my ability to service a customer was a lot easier than it was when I was in intermodal or when I was in the truck line of our company. Even though I had the assets and I controlled them and they were mine and I built collaborative relationships with my shippers, I only had a finite amount of resources, and when something went wrong, there's not a lot I could do about it. When you go into brokerage and you have the access to more capacity, it gives you flexibility. And I think that's the big key. So I think that's why it's different now than ever. Flexibility allows you to be able to recover. So I'm responsible for our truck line today. Our brokerage service is better than our truck line service. It's not because the truck line service has a bad plan. The truck line has a phenomenal plan, but only have a finite amount of resources. Actually, in brokerage, things go wrong more often than in the truck line, but I have 600,000 trucks inside marketplace to fall back on and to recover. So you get that ability to recover. So that flexibility is something that's completely different than what shippers have seen for the totality of transportation. And so that goes against the collaboration a little bit there.
And even the risk issue.
And the risk as well.
Yeah. So real quick, I know we're closing in on our time. I'd like to maybe get you to talk a little bit about 360 Box, the new kind of iteration of your marketplace, and what are your thoughts around how that is perhaps going to bring in a new narrative to the marketplace?
Well, in traditional brokerage, if you think about it, if you just think about dry van in the simplest perspective, and you take out the dedicated aspect of it, somewhere between 40 and 60% is drop and hook, and between 40 and 60% of that's live load. So your traditional brokerage has always targeted and satisfied kind of the live load aspect of it, but 83% of the market's capacity is in the small carrier community. And those small carriers have one truck and one trailer. And so they don't have the ability to be able to drop inside for those large shippers, or they don't even have access to those large shippers because it's a lot of small carriers. And so it doesn't really satisfy that part of the market. And so we were excited about 6 weeks ago, I guess it was, maybe a month ago, that we launched 360 Box, which is essentially running a drop trailer network with the small carrier community. So all the aspects that we talked about, digital matching, the access to the 600,000 trucks that we have inside the marketplace, we get about 30 million annualized views right now coming in and searching for freight. Now being able to take a drop trailer network and being able to offer that to those shippers that need that their supply chain is tooled in that manner that they have to have drop trailers. They can't change from that. That's the way they run. That's their production. And being able to offer that and give them the access to the majority of the market. Also, they're going to get access to the service that comes with it. Those large shippers with the large carriers, for the most part, don't get 95% on-time service.
It's constrained.
It's constrained. You don't have the flexibility. So being able to bring that in. So we're excited about that because we do feel like we're experts in running a box network. And whether that's trucking for the history of our company or the last 30 years running the intermodal containers that we have that we run with the railroads as well. So we feel like we have the expertise in running a box network, and now you put it with the market's major capacity source, put those together, and we're pretty excited about where that could go.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting to watch. And again, when we talk about disruption, again, disrupting yourselves and thinking broader about how you can leverage your marketplace and your matching service. Real quick, I know we've got we're almost out of time here, so I'd like to get maybe a quick flash response from you for a couple of questions. Amazon, your thoughts, real quick.
We welcome them to the logistics space. We think there's a lot of winners that are going to come out of this. The competitors that we talk about today are not the ones we talked about 5 years ago. So I think there's going to be multiple winners that will come out of an $800 billion market. Amazon could be one of those. We firmly believe we're going to be one of those, and there's going to be several names of people that are in this room that'll be part of that, the winning group as well.
Nice. Lastly, EVP, big company, innovative, disrupting yourselves. What's keeping you up at night in terms of logistics?
It's a great question. Lots of things. And I'd say just making sure that those iterative steps that we're doing along the bigger vision, that we're on top of them, that we are making adjustments fast and making changes and being able, that you don't want to steer too fast and too deep into one direction and realize that you've sunk too much in to be able to turn. You got to be able to realize that something's not working along that path, make adjustments and move. And so I'd say that's the thing, is making sure that we've got all the data points in sight, that when we see the things that we're doing and it's not working, you turn the dial a little bit and get it on the course that you need it to. Yeah,
kind of taking us back to my opening comments, this idea of kind of having something that you're competing with, but also embracing the fact that it's going to get us a temporary win, and the only way to really leverage it is to continually kind of
continue to innovate.
Innovate it, right?
That's right.
Hey, thanks a lot, Eric. I appreciate it, man. Thanks so much. It's been a great dialogue.
Yeah,
thank you all for your questions. Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it.